The Heiress in the Firestorm. The night sky above the luxury star cruiser shimmered like liquid glass as it drifted through the upper lanes of the Celian trade route, its hull painted in gold and silver light carrying nobles, merchants, and one woman whose name alone could buy planets, Lady Arya Valen, heiress to the Valen Dominion. Richest family in the Orion sector. Inside her private lounge, music played softly, and Arya watched the stars with bored eyes. She had everything, wealth, beauty, fame, but no freedom. She often said the stars looked peaceful only because people could not hear them screaming. Her bodyguards stood near the door, their armor polished and their faces hidden behind glowing visors. Suddenly, alarms shattered the calm. Red lights flashed across the deck, and the ship's AI voice roared, "Warning! Unidentified vessels approaching at high speed." Before anyone could react, the ship shook violently. Plasma torpedoes tore through the hull, and fire spread across the corridors. The pirates of the Void Reavers had struck, known for capturing nobles and selling them to enemies or worse. Arya stumbled. Her drink fell, shattering on the marble floor. Her guards pulled her toward the escape bay, but one explosion ripped through the side wall, hurling them all into chaos. Screams echoed as the pressure doors sealed, and the heiress found herself separated, trapped in smoke and flame. Meanwhile, deep inside the ship, a rescue team was boarding from an escort vessel. One man ran ahead of them, ignoring the captain's orders to fall back. His name was Ethan Cross. A human mercenary once part of the Earth Defense Corps. He had been hired as a low-ranking guard. But when others panicked, he moved straight toward the fire. "Human, stop, it's too dangerous." One alien officer yelled behind him, but Ethan didn't stop. He could hear faint cries through his comms, and his instincts screamed someone was still alive. He smashed through a half-melted door, smoke burning his lungs, and found her, Lady Arya Valen, trapped under a steel beam, her expensive gown torn, her hair covered in ash. The air crackled with fire and sparks. When she looked up and saw him, her eyes widened. You're a human?" she whispered in disbelief. Humans were considered low-tier species in the Empire, servants or soldiers for hire, not heroes, yeah. Ethan grunted, lifting the burning beam with a strained groan. "And you're lucky I am," he said with a faint smile. She coughed, clutching his arm as he helped her up. "You should leave, they'll kill you too," she said weakly, her voice shaking. "Not happening," he replied, pulling her close as another explosion rocked the hall. "I don't leave people behind." They ran through collapsing corridors, fire chasing them like a living monster. The floor trembled beneath their boots. The sound of tearing metal filled the air. Ahead, the hull breach widened, showing the cold black void of space beyond. Ethan slammed the emergency door controls, but the system was failing. "We're not going to make it this way," he muttered. Scanning for another route behind them, pirates were boarding, their heavy footsteps echoing. One of them shouted through the smoke, "Find the heiress alive." Arya froze, fear in her voice. "They're here for me." "Then let's make sure they don't get you," Ethan said, pulling a sidearm from his belt. His movements calm and precise, he fired at a fuel pipe, creating a burst of flame between them and the pirates. "Go," he shouted, dragging her toward a narrow maintenance shaft. Inside, the light flickered, metal creaked, and the temperature rose dangerously high. "You'll die if you stay," Arya shouted as they crawled, her voice breaking. Ethan turned his head slightly, his eyes hard but calm. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but not before you're safe." When they reached the pod bay, half the room was gone, ripped open to space. The last escape pod dangled by broken cables. Half hanging in the void, Arya gasped, "It's damaged." "We'll never survive that." Ethan ignored her words, scanning the control screen. His hand steady even as flames licked closer. "I've survived worse," he said simply, pressing the manual launch override. Arya looked at him again, seeing the soot on his face, the cut across his cheek, the raw determination in his eyes, and for the first time in her life she felt something unfamiliar. Trust. The ship groaned like a dying beast. The ceiling began to fall and she whispered softly, "Why are you still here?" Ethan met her gaze and said, "Because someone has to be." He slammed the launch button. The pod broke free with a violent jolt, spinning into the void as the entire cruiser exploded behind them. A wave of light and debris swallowed the stars. Inside the pod, alarms screamed again. One thruster failing, gravity vanishing. They were being pulled toward the gravity well of a nearby planet. Arya clutched his arm as the pod shook violently. "Hold on," Ethan shouted, gripping the controls as sparks flew. The last thing she saw before blacking out was his hand reaching to steady her. His eyes calm even as the fire outside turned the universe red. Then, silence. The pod vanished into the atmosphere of an unknown world, leaving behind the burning wreck of the Valen cruiser and across the galaxy. The news spread. The richest heiress in the stars was gone, and with her, a single human who refused to run, stranded with the heiress. The escape pod crashed through the thick clouds, flames trailing behind it as it tore through the sky. Metal screamed and the world below rushed up fast. Ethan gritted his teeth, trying to control the spin. But the systems were failing, Brace, he shouted, wrapping one arm around Arya as the pod slammed into the ground. The impact sent dust and debris flying. Everything went dark for a few seconds. When Arya opened her eyes, her ears rang. The air was hot and dry. The pod had landed in a wasteland. Cracked earth, red dust, and strange blue lightning flashing in the distant clouds. Ethan groaned beside her, his arm bleeding but his focus sharp. He pulled her free from the wreckage, checking for injuries. "You're fine," he said quickly, just shaken. Arya looked around in disbelief, her elegant gown now torn and stained. This isn't any known world," she whispered. "Where are we?" Ethan squinted at the horizon. "Uncharted planet. Maybe near the outer rim," he said, scanning the pod's damaged display. "No signals, no orbiting satellites, no rescue beacon working." Arya took a shaky breath. "So, we're stranded." "Looks like it," he replied calmly. "But stranded isn't dead." The heat pressed against them, waves of wind carrying fine sand that burned the skin. Ethan pulled a broken piece of tarp from the wreckage and turned it into a makeshift shade. He moved like a soldier who'd done this 100 times before. Efficient and silent, Arya tried to stand, but her legs trembled. She was used to soft beds and servants, not rough ground and survival. She frowned as Ethan ripped metal panels from the pod to make tools. "You act like this is normal," she said. He gave her a faint smile. "Survival usually is." Hours passed, the red sun dipped low, and strange shadows began to move beyond the rocks, glowing eyes blinking in the dark. Ethan noticed first. "Stay close," he said, drawing his sidearm. From the gloom, a low growl echoed. Then a creature stepped out, a reptilian beast, tall as a man, its skin shimmering with reflective scales. It hissed and charged. Arya screamed, but Ethan didn't flinch. He aimed, fired twice, and the creature fell, the shots echoing through the canyon. The smell of ozone filled the air. Her heart pounded as she looked at him. "You killed it like it was nothing," Ethan reloaded calmly. "I've seen worse on Mars," he said, wiping his arm. "Rule 1, don't panic. It wastes time." They dragged the body away, and Ethan started a fire using debris and the creature's bones to keep predators away. As night fell, the stars burned brighter than she had ever seen. Endless and cold, Arya sat beside the fire, her once perfect hands trembling. "No one's coming, are they?" she asked quietly. "Not soon," Ethan replied, staring into the flames. "But someone always comes eventually. If we keep the signal alive." She looked at him curiously. "You speak like a soldier." He didn't look at her, just nodded. "Used to be." Silence hung between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the whisper of distant winds. She studied him, the scars, the calm, the way he never complained. "Not once since they crashed. Why did you save me?" she asked finally, her voice soft, almost childlike. "You didn't even know who I was." Ethan leaned back, resting against a rock. "Didn't need to," he said. "You were alive." That was enough. Her throat tightened. She wasn't used to such simple answers. Everyone in her world wanted something: money, power, favor, but this man had nothing to gain. The firelight flickered across his face, and for the first time she saw humanity differently, not as weak but as something strong, something unbreakable. A soft sound broke the silence. The distant hum of engines. Arya gasped. "Rescue ships?" Ethan stood fast, eyes narrowing. He climbed a small ridge to see better in the sky. Faint lights moved closer, but the formation wasn't standard military. No beacon, no ID. His stomach tightened. "No," he muttered. "Those aren't rescuers." "What do you mean?" Arya asked, fear creeping back into her voice. He turned to her, his expression grim. "Those are hunters." Arya's eyes widened. "Hunters? You mean someone sent them to finish what the pirates started?" Ethan said, chambering his weapon and glancing toward the wreck. "Get inside." "Now?" The sky darkened as the approaching ships roared closer. beams of light sweeping across the valley. Arya hesitated, watching him. "What will you do?" Ethan smiled faintly, his eyes steady. "What humans always do," he said quietly. "Adapt and fight." She felt a chill run down her spine as she whispered, "You'll die." He gave a half shrug. "Not today." As the first dropships descended, the dust rose, fire lit the horizon again, and for a brief second, she thought he looked like something the galaxy had forgotten. Not prey, not servant, but a warrior. She stepped into the pod, her heart racing, and before closing the hatch, she whispered to herself. He stayed, even when everyone else would run. The night sky flared with the light of enemy ships, and Ethan Cross disappeared into the storm, ready to face them alone. The hunters of the Heiress. The red horizon burned as dropships descended like fiery comets, their engines screaming through the dusty air. Ethan crouched behind a jagged ridge, his rifle steady, eyes sharp, every muscle tense. He had been hunted before, but this time, it wasn't just his life on the line inside the broken escape pod. Arya clutched the emergency beacon, trying to repair its circuits. Her hand shaking. "Ethan, they're closing in fast," she said through the comm, static crackling in her voice. "I see them," he replied calmly. Scanning the valley, 4 ships, 20 soldiers. Armored and armed, they moved in formation. Efficient, disciplined, not pirates, professionals. Who'd want you dead bad enough to hire killers like these? Arya hesitated, guilt flickering in her eyes. "My family owns half the core trade lanes," she said softly. "If I die, the inheritance splits to the council. Many would profit from my death," Ethan sighed. "Figures," he muttered, switching to thermal vision. "You rich folks never make things simple." The first hunter squad landed near the wreckage. Their leader, a tall alien with silver armor and glowing eyes, raised a scanner. "Life signs, too," he said coldly. "The Heiress is alive, kill the human," Ethan smirked. "Yeah, you can try," he whispered. He had set traps around the canyon, pressure mines made from pod fuel cells, tripwires and rigged plasma cores. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The first explosion hit when they crossed the ridge. A flash of light tore through the dust, sending 2 hunters flying. The rest shouted, scrambling for cover. "It's a trap!" Ethan moved fast, firing short, controlled bursts. His aim perfect, he picked them off one by one, using the rocks as cover. The sound of plasma and thunder filled the air. Inside the pod, Arya could hear every shot. Her heart pounded as she whispered, "He's one man against all of them." Through the comm, she heard his voice, calm, unshaken. "Stay down, princess. I've got this." The hunters regrouped, using drones to flush him out. One drone flew overhead, scanning heat signatures. Ethan grabbed a piece of scrap metal and tossed it. The drone turned, targeting the decoy. He shot it midair, sparks raining down. But they were adapting. The leader shouted, "Flank him!" And soon Ethan was surrounded. He ducked behind a rock, breathing hard, his arm bleeding again. "Ethan," Arya cried, "they're closing in." He looked at the horizon, the setting sun painting everything red. He took a slow breath. "If they reach you, they'll take you alive," he said quietly. "Don't let that happen. I can't just leave you," she shouted, tears in her eyes. He smiled faintly through the comm. "Not planning to die yet," he said, then stood up, moving toward them with grim purpose. The hunters saw him rise, weapon glowing in the dust storm. "Surrender!" their leader shouted. Ethan fired first, his rifle overheating, but his shots deadly. The fight turned brutal, close combat. Fire and smoke everywhere. He ducked under a swing, drove his elbow into one's throat, and used the fallen's rifle to blast another. Then, pain exploded across his shoulder as a plasma bolt hit him. He staggered, dropped to one knee, but refused to fall. The leader approached, blade humming with energy. "You humans never learn," he sneered, raising his weapon. But before he could strike, a sharp sound echoed. Arya, standing behind him, clutching a small energy pistol she had found in the pod, fired. The bolt struck the leader's chest, sending him crashing backward. Ethan looked at her, stunned. "Nice shot," he said with a weak grin. She ran to him, falling to her knees, pressing her hand over his wound. "You're hurt," she said, voice trembling. "I've been worse," he murmured. His breathing heavy, the remaining hunters fled, their ships retreating into the night sky, leaving behind silence and burning sand. Arya tore part of her gown to stop the bleeding. "Don't you dare die now," she whispered. "Not after everything." Ethan's hand brushed hers weakly. "You're tougher than you look," he said softly. Eyes half closed, tears filled her eyes. You saved me when no one else would. Even when it made no sense, she whispered. Why? He opened his eyes slightly, looking at her through the fading light. Because someone had to remind them what being human means, he said quietly. She leaned closer, her voice breaking. Please don't die, I never asked anyone to stay. Until now. His lips curved in a faint smile. Guess I'm stubborn, he whispered. Before slipping into unconsciousness, the wind howled through the canyon. Carrying the smell of burnt metal, Arya held him close, eyes blazing with new determination. Above them, the stars watched silently, and for the first time, the heiress of the galaxy realized. She was no longer just a victim. She was his reason to fight, and she would not let him fall. Confession under the stars. Night fell heavy across the wasteland, a cold wind sweeping over the dunes. The last of the fires had died down, and the world felt silent, broken only by the soft crackle of a small campfire. Arya sat beside it, her arms wrapped around Ethan's unconscious body, his breathing shallow but steady. She had dragged him into the ruins of an old alien city half buried beneath the sand. Strange statues stared from the shadows, remnants of a civilization long forgotten. She had found a corner under a collapsed dome, patched it with debris, and lit a weak flame to keep the chill away. Hours passed, and still she didn't move. Her eyes fixed on him, her mind replaying everything, the explosions, the fire, the sound of his voice saying, I don't leave people behind. Finally, his eyes opened, faintly glowing from the reflection of the fire. You're still here? He whispered hoarsely. She almost laughed in relief. Of course I am, she said. You didn't think I'd just walk away, did you? He smiled weakly, trying to sit up, pain flashing across his face. I've seen royalty abandon armies for less, he said. I'm not like them, she said quietly, pressing a wet cloth against his shoulder, cleaning the burn. Not anymore. He watched her silently, the firelight dancing in her silver eyes, her once pristine gown now torn and covered in dust, her hands shaking from exhaustion, and yet she looked stronger than before, more real. Guess we're both different now, he said softly. She looked at him, then glanced at the stars above, 1,000 points of light stretching into infinity. I used to think the galaxy was mine, she said. Every world, every ship, every servant bowed to my family's name. And now? He asked. Now I realize I never owned anything, she whispered. I was just trapped in a golden cage. For a long time neither spoke, the wind whistling softly through the ruins. Ethan leaned back, closing his eyes. You'll be rescued soon, he said. Once your beacon stabilizes. Arya looked down, hesitating. And what about you? He shrugged. I'll disappear before they arrive. Your people don't take kindly to humans touching their royalty? Something in her chest tightened. She shook her head. You risked your life for me. You bled for me, she said, her voice trembling. And now you think I'll just let you vanish? He opened one eye, studying her expression. You sound like you care, he said quietly. Her cheeks flushed and she turned away. Don't flatter yourself, she said, trying to hide the emotion in her tone. But he smiled faintly. You're a terrible liar. Silence lingered between them again, and the fire dimmed, leaving only starlight across the sand. After a moment she spoke again, softer this time. You know, no one has ever stayed for me before. Ethan frowned. What do you mean? I mean people stay because of my name, my wealth, my power, she said. But you stayed when there was nothing to gain. Not even a chance to survive. He didn't answer at first, then said, Maybe I stayed because you needed someone to remind you that life isn't just titles and credits. She smiled sadly, looking down. You talk like no one else I've ever met. He chuckled weakly. That's humanity for you, we talk a lot. Even when we're bleeding. She reached out, brushing his hand gently. Her touch hesitant but warm. You'd still stay, if I undressed? She asked suddenly, her voice trembling between humor and vulnerability. Ethan blinked, caught off guard, then let out a low laugh, shaking his head. That's your way of testing me? She looked at him seriously now, eyes shimmering in the firelight. No, she whispered. It's my way of asking if you'd stay even when there's nothing left to hide. He stared at her for a long moment, then smiled softly. I'd stay, he said, because you're worth more than what you think you are. Her heart skipped, and for the first time in her life, she didn't know what to say. No noble words, no command, just silence filled with emotion. She rested her head against his shoulder, her voice barely a whisper. You make me feel human. He looked at her, then at the stars above, the fire fading into embers. Then maybe that's what you were always meant to be, he said quietly. Hours later, as they drifted into uneasy sleep beneath the alien sky, the beacon's faint light blinked once, then twice, a soft tone chiming. Ethan's eyes opened and his heart sank. We've got company, he murmured. Arya stirred, confused. Rescue? He looked at the scanner, reading the signatures. Not pirates, he said grimly, but not exactly friends either. Outside, the darkness came alive with the hum of massive engines, blue lights cutting through the mist, ships bearing the insignia of the Valen Dominion fleet. Arya's breath caught. My family, she whispered. But there was no joy in her voice, only fear. Ethan stood slowly, blood still drying on his sleeve. Then I guess our quiet night's over, he said. His tone steady. She looked at him, her eyes full of emotion. They'll never understand what you did for me, she said. He met her gaze, calm and certain. Doesn't matter if they understand, he said. Only matters that you remember. As the shadows of her fleet descended across the ruins, the wind carried the faint echo of her whisper. Ethan, don't let them take you. But deep down she already knew. Tomorrow would test her courage more than any storm, because the next choice would decide not just their fate, but humanity's place in the galaxy. The choice of the heiress. The dawn rose pale and cold over the shattered ruins. The alien city bathed in blue light from the engines of the incoming fleet. Dozens of ships hovered above the desert, their shadows stretching for miles. Armored soldiers descended from shuttles, banners of the Valen Dominion rippling in the wind. Ethan stood at the edge of the ruin, his rifle slung at his side, his body weak but his eyes steady. He could already see the silhouettes of the soldiers marching toward them, their formation perfect, their armor shining. They looked like saviors, but he knew better. Arya stepped beside him, her gown torn and stained, her hair tangled, yet she carried herself like a queen reborn. Not the pampered heiress who had boarded the luxury cruiser days ago, but a woman who had walked through fire and found her soul. They'll take me first, she said quietly, but they'll see you as a contaminant, a human who touched royal blood. Ethan gave a faint grin. Guess I've been called worse, he said, trying to sound calm. She turned to him, her voice trembling. Ethan, please, whatever happens, don't fight them. They'll kill you without a thought. He met her gaze, his expression soft but unyielding. If they try to hurt you, they'll have to, he said simply. The first wave of Dominion soldiers arrived, their weapons raised, their leader, Admiral Cale Valen, Arya's uncle, stepped forward, his silver armor gleaming under the sun. Arya, he called, his voice cold and commanding. Thank the stars you're alive. Your father will... He stopped mid-sentence when he saw Ethan, his expression hardening instantly. What is that doing here? He spat, pointing toward the human. Arya stood firm. He saved my life, she said sharply. You'll speak to him with respect. The Admiral sneered. He's human, child, a mercenary, filth from a dying world. You think such creatures deserve respect? Ethan stayed silent, his jaw tight, but his eyes burned with quiet fire. He risked everything, Arya continued, stepping closer to her uncle. When your soldiers ran, when your fleet hesitated. He came for me through fire and death, Cale's voice rose. Enough! You've been traumatized, you don't know what you're saying, he said, motioning for guards. Take her to the ship, and arrest the human. The soldiers moved forward. Rifles raised, Ethan shifted his stance slightly. Ready to defend, but Arya stepped in front of him, her voice shaking but loud enough to echo through the valley. Touch him, and I will have every one of you stripped of rank. The guards froze, uncertainty flickering across their visors. Arya! Cale snapped. This is treason against your bloodline. No, she said, lifting her chin. This is truth. She turned to the watching soldiers, her voice ringing clear. This man is the reason I stand here breathing. He is the reason the Valen name still echoes through the stars. You call him human like it's an insult, but I call him savior. A murmur spread through the ranks, the soldiers exchanging uncertain glances. Cale's face darkened. You disgrace yourself before the Empire, he hissed. Do you know what this will cost you? Arya looked him straight in the eye, her voice calm and defiant. Everything I had was bought by fear and greed. But what I found here with him was honor, something our empire forgot long ago. She stepped closer to Ethan, her hand finding his, and in that moment, A dozen recording drones from the fleet focused on them, broadcasting the scene to the entire Dominion. Kale realized too late what she was doing. "Arya, stop this," he shouted, but she didn't stop. Her voice carried across the comms, across worlds, across stars. "To every world that hears my words, remember this human." Ethan Cross, when my ship burned and death closed in. It wasn't nobles or fleets or power that saved me. It was him. Ethan looked at her, speechless, his throat tight. "You didn't have to do this," he said softly. She smiled through tears. "Yes, I did," she whispered. "You stayed when the universe would have run," Kale barked orders. But the moment was already too large to contain. The footage spread instantly through the networks, across colonies and core worlds, showing the heiress of the richest dominion kneeling beside a human soldier, declaring him a hero. Hours later, as the fleet returned to orbit, Arya stood beside Ethan on the command deck, her hand still in his, every eye in the bridge fixed on them. "You know," Ethan said quietly. "You just started an interstellar scandal." She smiled softly. "Then let it burn," she said. "Maybe something better will rise from the ashes." The stars reflected in their eyes as the ship turned toward the galactic horizon, and whispers spread across every world. "A human saved the Valen heiress," they said, "and she chose him over her empire." For the first time in recorded history, humanity's name wasn't spoken with pity or mockery, but with awe. And as the fleet disappeared into the light of 1,000 suns, Ethan's voice echoed softly. "Guess we just changed the galaxy." Arya smiled, leaning close, her whisper barely audible. "No, Ethan. You did, and somewhere far beyond the stars a new legend began, one that would echo for generations. The story of a human who stayed, and a heiress who finally saw what it meant to be free."